The game is going to get faster right from the start. I do feel like Konami could evolve some sort of archetype specific. I really do think that it is very possible that Konami could make literal hand traps, traps that activate from the hand.
Okay, so I'm not going to come out and straight say that I predicted the future, but I pretty much predicted the future. YugiNoNo! I hope that you had a great Christmas with your families and all that stuff, but today we're getting right back down to business, and we're going to start getting back to business by discussing the crazy evolution of trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I wanted to bring this up mainly because of one card in particular that has been, having the biggest impact on our current metagame, but I also wanted to go back and explore how we've gotten there. I wanted to show how far we've come as far as trap cards go, and I wanted to also show how trap cards won't ever really be the same. And I'm going to start this off by going over the very simple design of trap cards, what their intended purposes, and how they've been played in Yu-Gi-Oh! So instead of going over trap card history as far as, Mirror Force being played and skill drain and just, every single influential trap card, let's just keep things simple. And to keep it as simple as possible, trap cards are just cards you set in order to set a trap for your opponent. As simple as it sounds, that's really what trap cards are meant for. And since that is what trap cards are meant for, and that is what they're designed for, they inherently have a flaw, which is that you have to set them before your opponent does something. So just like the last video, guys, I'm going to use Solemn as an example here, okay? So what good does a Solemn Warning or a Solemn Strike do against an established board going second? Those cards do you zero good, no good at all. So you can see how the inherent nature of trap cards completely clashes with the speed of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In other words, guys, trap cards are pretty useless unless you win the die roll and go first, right? And the inherent flaw of trap cards is not only what led to cards like Evenly Matched, but the inherent flaw of trap cards also led to the rise of hand traps, which is a subject for a completely different video that I'm actually gonna do. So sticking to the topic of this video, Konami's smart, right? I mean, they have to be smart. We keep buying all their crap. They have to know what they're doing, right? And they see this inherent problem with trap cards in comparison to all the other cards that they're releasing, them being faster and everything, and therefore making the game faster. So they have to do something with the trap cards. They have to change trap cards somehow. So how do you go about changing trap cards? Well, you either make them activate from the hand, or you make them activate from the graveyard so you get extra use out of them. And that is exactly what Konami did. The earliest examples I can find of trap cards that activate from the hand are Dimension Slice and Typhoon. Now, I could be wrong about these two cards being the earliest examples, but they're just the earliest examples that I could find. Now, how do you make activating trap cards from the hand fair? Well, just like in the case of Dimension Slice and Typhoon, you have to have conditions present on the board in order to activate them from the hand. But following that logic about trying to keep trap cards fair if you're going to have them activate from the hand, Evenly Matched also requires a field condition in order to activate it from the hand. But even before we had Evenly Matched, trap cards and cards that help trap cards were doing some pretty crazy things. And trap cards were even doing things in the meta. I've already mentioned Typhoon, but Typhoon was meta actually in Monarch format. But speaking of Monarch format, the Prime Monarch was a trap card that activated in the graveyard that summoned itself as a monster, which is something that trap cards had been doing already and that Konami had already developed trap cards into doing, summoning themselves as monsters, but they hadn't summoned themselves from the graveyard as monsters before that point. And honestly, before the Prime Monarch, trap cards being monsters was pretty fair. There wasn't just like this horde of meta decks that started coming out of the woodwork as soon as Konami started making trap cards be monsters. There was nothing like that. I mean, in random Xyz decks like rank 10 trades, for example, you would use trap cards to make your rank 10 trades, of course, but outside of that, the trap cards being monsters didn't really make that big of an impact, like at all. At least as far as the TCG is concerned. The rise of Monarchs, both domain and extra deck Monarchs, led to Prime being the first mainstream trap monster to really do a lot of damage in the meta. But even before Evenly Matched and before the rise of Monarchs, Konami was still trying to help trap cards. A great example of this is when Guiding Aradne came out during the Pendulum era. As if pre-Master Rule 4 Pendulums weren't broken enough, and as if Pepe wasn't broken enough, we had to get a Pendulum monster at that searched counter trap cards. A card that could literally search Solemn Strike. That was, believe it or not, also very revolutionary for trap cards because it searched trap cards. That's another problem with trap cards inherently, and just, main deck cards in general, is that you have to actually draw them to be able to use them, or at least search them or something. And that's exactly what Guiding Aradne did. It's just broken. It's a broken card, and it used like the Monarch's ploy, like, oh, here's 3 cards, choose from these. I'll take that Solemn Strike, thank you. And Guiding Aradne was a card that really helped counter fairies, and counter fairies were a deck that Konami came out with a long time ago, way before Guiding Aradne was even ever thought of. Counter fairies were just another deck and another mechanic to make use out of all these counter trap cards that have high cost. Which actually brings me to my next point here, which is that Konami building decks and designing decks around trap cards is just another method that they use to revolutionize the trap card mechanic. Counter Fairy is a fantastic example of this, and we're actually getting another Counter Fairy structure deck in January. And speaking of Guiding Aradne Pepe format being able to search out trap cards, this discussion would not be complete without trap tricks. Trap tricks were revolutionary in Yu-Gi-Oh! To say that they weren't is like lying. I mean, it really is. They made traps do things. I mean, it's in the name, trap tricks. I mean, they did all but make traps do backflips, literally. Trap tricks are not only bodies on the field, they interact with trap cards. I mean, even searching trap cards in the case of Mermilia, which is incredible. Being able to search like a bottomless trap hole back in hat format was pretty insane. That was incredible. I mean, hat format is literally named for trap tricks. I mean, hat format is named after the deck hat, which hat stands for hands, artifacts, trap tricks. I mean, trap tricks were very, very revolutionary in Yu-Gi-Oh, guys. I mean, even in Pepe format, going all the way into Pepe format, trap tricks Rafflesia, being able to send a treacherous trap hole from deck, or a bottomless trap hole, or a time space trap hole, that was just incredible in Pepe format, especially treacherous trap hole. Treacherous trap hole was just a great, great card in Pepe format. Even including the next archetype that I'm going to be talking about, trap tricks are probably by far the most influential trap archetype of all time. But the most recent example of Konami coming out with a deck that revolutionizes trap cards is, you guessed it, Magical Musketeers. The Magical Musketeer archetype lets traps be activated from the hand as an archetype to disrupt your opponent like any time that you want to. Which in my opinion is a fair cost to activate trap cards from the hand as having a Magical Musketeer monster in order to do it. You can't have a crazy effect like that without having some sort of cost, you know what I mean? Like Cosmos. I'm going to use Cosmos as an example here. You can't have a big monster that can't be targeted and just be able to drop it on the board like, you know, a Blue Eyes alternative, for example. That would be completely unfair. Cosmos are a fair deck because in order to get this giant untargetable monster out, you have to have a pilot, you have to summon the pilot, and the pilot has to tag out, you know, has to activate its effect, it has to tag out in order for you to get your big monster. That's fair. That's a fair way for that to happen. So in my opinion, guys, evenly matched, and cards like evenly matched aren't just dropped on us out of nowhere. They're often developed over a long period of time through evolving formats and everything, and they're usually released right around the time that you would expect them to be released if you look at the timeline. Power creep in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is necessary in more ways than just, you know, phasing out old decks. Phasing out old cards can be completely necessary as well, especially as other cards evolve. And I'll use an example using a card that I mentioned in this very video. If your opponent has a Prime Monarch up, what do you want to do with that card? Do you want to MST it, or do you want to Cosmic Cyclone it? If you MST it, it'll be in the graveyard for it to be able to be activated, but if you Cosmic Cyclone it, it'll be banished and your opponent can't use it. And that is just an example from a card used in this video. There's cards like Toy Vendor and many other spell and trap cards that use the graveyard and stuff, so Cosmic Cyclone is a result of those cards being smarter. Now, you could make the arguments that power creep sucks, and it kind of does because you have to spend more money, but spending money is what keeps Yu-Gi-Oh! Going. I mean, if Konami's not making money off of Yu-Gi-Oh!, they're gonna stop making cards, guys. It's just how business works. And you could also make the argument that going first in Yu-Gi-Oh! Should not be the end of the world. You shouldn't lose just because you lose the die roll, and I would have to agree with you, but that is just something that Konami is going to have to fix, and until they fix it, we have to look at Yu-Gi-Oh! How it is now. Not spending all of our time complaining about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Should be. If you want to play some old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Then play old school Yu-Gi-Oh! But you can't play modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And expect power creep not to be a thing, and not expect cards to change and stuff. So in closing, guys, yes, historically in Yu-Gi-Oh! Going first wasn't the end of the world. You were able to play the cards that you wanted, or at least, you know, the trap cards and stuff you wanted, and not be able to instantly auto-lose because your opponent, you know, built a bigger board than you. That wasn't the case in old school Yu-Gi-Oh!, but that also hasn't been the case in many, 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 many years. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has spent those other years getting so much faster, and cards have just evolved with the game and have evolved with the speed of the game, and that is what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. It's just evolution. Cards just evolve, guys, and trap cards are no different, and since I don't see trap cards ever being fully phased out of the game because they are a part of Yu-Gi-Oh!, trap cards are just never gonna be the same, guys. They're gonna do other things, and they're gonna interact with your opponent, and they're gonna activate from the hand, and they're gonna activate from the grave, and they're gonna do all kinds of crazy stuff. That is just how Yu-Gi-Oh! Goes. But that is going to do it for this video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you want 10% off of the best mats on the planet, then be sure to enter the code EugeneVersusJesus on MetaMats.com, and you will get 10% off of the best mats on the planet. I am not even kidding. The links to my line of MetaMask, my Patreon, my PayPal, my Facebook, all that stuff is down in the description, so be sure to check that out. But until next time though, guys, I'm going to go reevaluate my life because I've been thinking about traps too much.
Subscribe!